we're going to move right ahead with Deborah Epstein-Henry, who you may know as the bad guy from the scenarios. So don't be too afraid. I hear that, in fact, she's not really anything like the character that she portrayed. And here she is.
So, yes, Pat is, in fact, a very dear friend of mine, and she told me to behave meanly, and so I did, as instructed. So I do try to be a nice person, so hopefully you won't penalize me for this morning. So I'm just waiting for my PowerPoint to come up. And are we good? Okay. Okay, great. So we have, I think, an hour together, and then we have the reception. This is a challenging thing. I've got to keep you engaged because I'm standing between you and wine, and so I will be as engaging as possible. I actually really want you guys to ask questions. This is meant to be an interactive piece, and this is your opportunity to get these questions addressed. So I want to start with a personal story. I tell a lot of stories because I find that if you find them relatable, hopefully you'll remember them and they can resonate and you can apply them, most importantly, to your own life. So I'm the mother of 3 boys, and when my middle son, Spence, was in kindergarten, the teacher had this wonderful tradition where she had a question of the day. And you would drop off in the morning, and there the question was posed, and at the end of the day, you'd pick up and see all the kids' answers. And one day I dropped off, and I had this amazing question, which was, what does your mom do? And I've talked to my sons for years about my work and how excited I am about it and all the stuff that I do. So I was like, this is going to be awesome. So I pick up at the end of the day, and there are the lists of all of these impressive moms. And it was an impressive group. There were doctors and lawyers and authors, financial planners, all these sort of people, engineers, IP lawyers. And then at the bottom of the list was Spencer. They alphabetized by first name, and it says, my mom makes my lunch. Okay, so there's Spence in his kindergarten class, and there he is. And I actually am quite good about lunch, but the problem is this was a terrible response. All these other employed, wonderful women, and I called my sister and said, clearly I'm failing on both fronts. This is a disaster. And she, being the good sister that she is like, no, this is great. In fact, Spence is 5. Pretty much lunch is the most important moment of his day. You're meeting his needs. It's all great. So, what else do I have to go with? I was like, okay, I'll go with this, and I'm really happy. But here's the thing. He's a kindergartner. It's all about him. And this, to me, this story is the crux of why all of us are so anxious about self-promotion, because everybody's going to know we're just thinking it's all about me. So the real focus of my remarks today is how do you demonstrate your value without being that obnoxious person in the room? How do you not be the transparent 5-year-old Spencer that, like my son Spencer? So what are the real challenges around self-promotion? And I've surveyed lawyers about this issue across the country, and these are the most common responses I see, and these are ones that won't surprise you. Most importantly, it's going to be, it's self-serving, it's too obvious. People are going to think I'm bragging, that I'm arrogant, all those terrible things. Some of us are really self-critical and don't think we're worthy, and that's a sort of separate pocket of people. There are people who also feel they're just not savvy enough to negotiate the internal politics and how to effectively self-promote to get the reception that they want. Again, many don't feel worthy of that self-promotion. Some people don't want to impose on others. If I'm going to self-promote, it's going to be perhaps asking somebody who's senior to me to back me in a meeting and that sort of thing. And they feel, I don't want to do that. I don't want to impose. A lot of people know that if you're raising your hand for something and self-promoting, that means your colleague who may be vying for it too, you'll be up against them and competing with them, and a lot of people are uncomfortable about that. A lot of women in particular feel their accomplishments should speak for themselves. And to me, this is in some ways the most painful type of anxiety around self-promotion because we just think, oh, we're so good. We're in our offices. We've got heads down. We have our heads down much more than the men, and they're out there self-promoting about sort of half the value they may have, and we're there waiting to get tapped on our shoulder, and often we're not. So the question is, how do we get there effectively? How do we demonstrate our value? And I want to walk you through a series of steps that I've seen others adopt effectively, and again, really encourage you to ask questions along the way. So if you're still questioning, though, whether you think this self-promotion is worthy, I just want to share this little research finding of Claire Shipman, who many of you may know her name. She's on Good Morning America, and she co-authored her second book called The Confidence Code. And she and her co-author, Katty Kay, found the biggest finding of their book was this quote: "Success, it turns out, correlates just as closely with confidence as it does with competence," meaning that half of how you're evaluated in the workplace is that projected confidence. And we, again, often focus on just being good. I heard in the last panel how important quality is. Yes, but like you said, quality is the threshold issue here. It's all those extras that really demonstrate, are we going to be the leaders in the room? And so for those of you who think, oh, this is not important, this is sort of fluff, it's half of how you're being evaluated. So listen closely. For starters, you have to be good. To that point of having talent be the threshold issue, you want to make sure you're good because, of course, we all know those self-promoters who don't really have the gravitas, who don't really have the substance, who are blabbing about how great they are. So it's not only enough to be talented, though. You want to be indispensable, meaning that you don't only deliver quality work, but you need to be indispensable to your colleagues. Only if they really need you and they're really relying on you do you, again, deserve to really do that self-promoting. Part of it is understanding your own value, not diminishing the fact, oh, I'm not worthy, I'm that sort of thing, but bringing that enormous contribution to others and knowing that you are the person who can deliver that value. That's sort of threshold. The next step is really being prepared and studying up. And what I mean by that is being at the ready when people call on you, not for a specific assignment, but just being composed, being that person who can demonstrate your deliverable at the moment. So a classic example, of course, is the elevator speech, which is typically composed of 3 sentences. It's being able to say, your name and where you work, 2, what your area of expertise is, and 3, really what value you can bring at that moment to that person, knowing your audience. We'll get into that a little bit more in a few moments. But being prepared is also about doing your homework beforehand. What I find particularly in the in-house legal departments that I see is there's a lot that goes on in meetings. In fact, some people call it a culture of meetings, but there are the main meetings, and then there are the pre-meetings. And often in those pre-meetings, a lot of the decisions are being made. And so the question is, can you sort of get your alliances in place? Can you be prepared in those pre-meetings? Can you have those conversations beforehand so that you know who's going to be aligned with you, who's going to back you for that next opportunity, for that promotion, for the opportunity for you to raise your hand for something, who's going to be on your side? So doing that legwork and being prepared in advance is really important. Also, the opportunity to do that, of course, is in reviews. And I see so many people who go to annual reviews just sort of waiting to be told how they fared that year. But instead, thinking about that review as your ultimate opportunity to self-promote. You are there to talk about your contributions over the course of that year. So being able to compose in advance a one-pager that really has a bulleted list of all of your contributions of that year and how you brought value to the team and what people, what matters did you help on, which people on your team were, impacted by those successes that you brought. Being able to bring that agenda to your own annual review is really an important piece of that. And that's another thing I just want to underscore. There are certain venues where it's expected that you're going to be talking about your performance. Those are real missed opportunities when you don't self-promote because the topic on the agenda is you. And so if you don't seize that opportunity to control the conversation or at least provide really constructive feedback into that conversation, it's a missed opportunity. Also, in a venue like a review, if you can produce a one-page memo that really enumerates where your contributions lie and where the impact was felt, it's that much more important, particularly in law firm contests, when you think about somebody who's at a firm, let's say, for 7 years. Each year that file is pulled out, and each year is your version of the story of how you've demonstrated your contribution, who you've worked with, how you've affiliated, what the impact was, et cetera. I want to pause there and see if there are questions or you've been in scenarios like this where it's been challenging and you want to pose that as an example. And I did meet some people during the course of the day, and I do know a bunch of you. So just be forewarned, I may be calling on people. Questions? Yes.
So I struggle with the phrase "be indispensable." So I've certainly worked for. I was outside in a firm for a while. I just moved in house. I've certainly worked with partners who thought I was indispensable. You know, Katie has to be on my case, and I cannot live if Katie is not on my case. And then I developed relationships with clients who felt the same way. But the fact of the matter is that there are other talented associates at my firm who probably could have done the work, right? So I think that I really struggle with the phrase "be indispensable," and I wonder if you could talk more about that.
Sure. You know, I do a lot of speaking and work around the issue of sponsorship. And I don't know, it's a term of art. I know some people are using it, some people aren't. But very briefly, sponsorship is different from mentoring in that a sponsor is somebody who's a power broker who's willing to use his or her power to back somebody. And a sponsee is different from a mentee in that anybody can be a mentee, but a sponsee is high potential and somebody who is willing, who that sponsor is willing to put his or her name behind because that person's really high potential. I raise that example because I think sponsorship is a really great opportunity to be indispensable, and that's how you can effectively self-promote often because it's those senior people who you want to recognize. So I'll share a story. I did a program years ago with Julie Sweet when she was then general counsel of Accenture, and she told this story how when she was at a law firm lawyer as a junior associate at one of the top firms in New York, there was a senior partner who she really wanted to learn his background, get to know his expertise, and she really wanted to be that indispensable associate to that senior partner. And so she went into his office one day, and this took a lot of, sort of trepidation, but with this trepidation, took a lot of courage, and said, I see you're really busy. I'm just, an associate here, but I'm really interested in your practice area. I'm really interested in learning from you. And I'll do anything on your desk that you don't want to do. That article that you're getting an invitation to write that you don't have time to write, I'll do the first draft. That brief that you don't have time to even look at the case law and analyze and then write the first draft, I'll write. I'll do basically any junk on your desk you don't want to deal with. Now, she happened to be super talented. What dream from a senior partner to have a talented associate come in and say, I'll handle sort of the first round of everything you don't want to do. That's what I'm talking about in indispensability, is that if you want somebody powerful to have your back, then you need to prove to them that you are worthy. And by the way, those senior people, and I see some of the senior people in the room, I think will vouch for this and attest to this, they need trusted people in their back pocket who can, jump in, like the example was provided. If you're on vacation, you need somebody else to be able to cover and do those sorts of things. That's the kind of symbiotic indispensability that I'm talking about. Yes?
I just wanted to give 2 other examples for indispensability that I've had use in my career. I started off at a large law firm, 85 lawyers, and had 10 other associates in my first-year associate class. So how do you compete against that? Everybody has great grades. Everybody is a workaholic. And so I actually ended up working for the partners that nobody else wanted to work for. So they were the partners who were sitting back in the corner writing the patent applications. They weren't the high-profile ones out winning the cases. And that's how I made my billing goals, and that's how I became indispensable to those partners that nobody else wanted to work for. And it was one of those partners' clients that ended up saying, hey, I want Valerie to come in-house. The other way you can do it is to look at your peers and see what their strengths and weaknesses are, match it with your strengths and weaknesses, and then you find the strength that you have that your peers have as a weakness. I was always very client-oriented. I'd answer the phone. I wouldn't run from clients. I'd be there. I'd respond quickly. Sometimes my colleagues would be off on the golf course with the person that they thought was the highest in the firm or the general counsel. And then I would be talking to those lower-level folks in volume and getting their work done. So indispensability doesn't mean having to go out and find the highest person in the firm and getting that person to sponsor you. It can be just looking at those around you and figuring out what your strength is, their weakness, and you just do your strength to compete.
Those are great examples. And I also want to underscore something that came out from the prior panel that also often can be a real distinguisher with people. And that is quality work, again, is a threshold issue. But in some of the research that's been done of in-house lawyers in terms of how they evaluate the satisfaction of their outside counsel, they say in addition to quality of work as a sort of threshold issue, what's really important to them is responsiveness and accessibility. So if you can be that person who is responsive and can really distinguish yourself in terms of really treating if you're a law firm lawyer, treating the partners at your firm as your clients and being able to be responsive and accessible in addition to delivering that top-notch work, that can be a big distinguisher. I want to move on and talk about the value of observing others. Knowing and reading your audience is so critical to effective self-promotion. I often see people who really are doing the right things, but they're completely wrong in misjudging who needs to receive that information. I like to tell this story about my middle son, Spence, again. It's like I never attributed much to birth order until I had 3 kids, and now I'm like, it's all about the birth order, particularly with 3 of the same sex. It's super competitive. But Spence and all my boys for years really wanted Xbox, and they tried everything with us in terms of negotiating for it, and they're like, everybody's got it, and it's like hand-eye coordination really is improved. I mean, all this crap. And we're like, we don't care if you're like the only suburban kids who don't have Xbox. There's no value in it, blah, blah, blah. And then it was coming close to Hanukkah, and he did like a PowerPoint. There was a reference to PowerPoint on the prior panel. So my kids see me doing PowerPoints all the time. They were doing PowerPoints. I think Spence was 10 at the time. And there was this one slide that showed my husband and I toasting with a glass of wine and the boys sitting on a couch playing Xbox. And I was like, done, you got it. He's like, more time with you and Dad. I was like, sold. So knowing your audience is key in self-promotion. If you want something done, you need to know how is this person best going to receive this information, not how do I want to convey it, but again, who is the best audience and how am I best going to convey it? So taking note of others and how they effectively self-promote is really great. And again, you have colleagues, and it's actually very valuable to look at senior people in your organizations and see those people who are getting recognition but not in an offensive way. Seek them out. You wouldn't say, oh, you're such a great self-promoter, Stacy. But I would say if I were junior to you, oh, Stacy, you've had so much success here. I would love to grab you for an hour coffee and just talk a little bit about your trajectory at Teva and how you got so high up in this amazing shoe company, that kind of thing. I'm just kidding. But importantly, if you were approached that way, Stacy, I imagine you wouldn't be like, oh no. I mean, who doesn't want to be talking about themselves, particularly somebody who's good at self-promotion, right? So the idea of looking at people within your organizations, and you all have your own culture, so something that's going to work at Teva is not necessarily going to work at Microsoft or elsewhere. So the idea of seeing people within your organizations who've had success in self-promoting and grabbing them and saying, oh, can I talk with you about that? How have you been effective in your career trajectory again? And saying what wouldn't work for you. Being able to decipher that in your observations of others is really important, particularly, again, within your workplace, so knowing what would resonate within your culture. Crediting others is critical. And part of, again, what people don't like about self-promotion is that, again, think of the image of Spencer, it's all about me. How do you deflect that? By, again, trying to demonstrate your value by also crediting others. So I'm up here talking about different things that I've researched and I've learned, but I'm citing to Claire Shipman. If I'm able to defer to other experts, it's a way to sort of deflect the fact that I may be up there talking about myself. So the idea of being able to recognize other people's contributions, and importantly, in a team environment, when you're in, particularly in the in-house legal department and working in teams, and being able to credit some of the junior people and say, okay, we're building on this. And if you're leading that team, of course, that is self-promoting you by promoting your team members. That's a really important way. So you want to be careful here. You want to cite to others. You want to be respectful and credit people for their contributions. You certainly don't want to fawn. So it's a balance. Benefiting others is another key thing. And I want to give you an example again here. I did an event years ago at a law firm, and the woman who I'm friends with, who was one of the partners at the firm who organized the event, got tremendous kudos the next day. And so she forwarded anonymously one of the accolades she was receiving from these general counsel who attended the event. And she said to me, I don't know what to do here because I want to send this to the managing partner who was at the event, but I don't want to be that obnoxious person who's like, FYI, this GC thinks I'm fabulous. And I said, well, can you give me a little bit more context here? What was going on? And what's the context of the relationship with this general counsel? And she said, we've been doing their environmental work for years. We've been talking about how to effectively grow the business so that we start doing more of the corporate work, which is more lucrative. But we haven't had entree yet. I said, well, what about just forwarding the email and saying, looks like Jim was really excited about last night's event. Maybe now's the time to take him to dinner and really pitch him on growing this relationship. It's precisely what she did and precisely what happened. So it was that same email that was forwarded, but rather than that sort of FYI, aren't I great, it was saying, how do we use this moment where the client was pleased with us in seeing that I was great and using that to benefit the firm. So any time that you can align your success with the success of your company or your firm, there's going to be so much more receptivity to the information because it's, again, not transparent that it's self-motivated. And in fact, it isn't just self-motivated. It is going to ideally benefit the firm or your company. Pairing self-promotion with being a resource is also really important. I confess I do this all the time. I offer programming. It's webcasted. It's recorded. I offer that on a complimentary basis. People want information on these sorts of topics. Is it secretly an opportunity to self-promote? It is. But if I can pair being a resource to somebody with also getting my brand out there, I am going to do that. I don't think that's shame in that. There should be shame in that because, again, it's providing a value. So the idea of being a resource in any way you can is a very effective means of self-promotion. And it is a way that you can, of course, again, deliver value. Promoting your teams and others. Again, Stacey, I'll turn to you, and we've known each other, so I'm not picking on you, as you know. But, just that last point that you made about how important it is in working with outside counsel, if people are not good to your team, they're not working for you. That is an opportunity to promote your team. That makes you look good. Are you saying it for that reason? Absolutely not. But if you can benefit yourself in recognizing the contributions of your team members, absolutely you should be doing it. This notion of a promotion buddy, as I like to call it, I think is really valuable. And here I'm going to call out somebody else in the room. Pat Gillette is a dear friend of mine. So we have this deal where if there's an opportunity that one of us can't take, we give it to the other. And you know what? It makes me look good. So if somebody says, hey, do you want to do a talk on implicit bias? That's not an expertise, but I'll tell you who you need to hire for this. It makes me look good. The client is happy because, then their research is done. But I'm able to endorse somebody who they don't know she's a dear friend, but by the way, she better be darn good, which she is, because my reputation is on the line. So if a reporter calls, well, who else must I interview as a gender diversity expert before I complete this article? You got to interview Pat. And again, it's making me look good, but we have that opportunity. So within your organizations, it's hard sometimes to create that anonymity, that you don't have that partiality as somebody who's a friend. But if you have somebody who you can endorse, and in turn, they are doing it to you for you when you can. And again, it's not a quid pro quo. It's just a general opportunity to be generous where you can. And again, provide value to that reporter, to that client. And if you can pair that promotion opportunity with colleagues who you support and who are worthy of your recommendation, that's a great opportunity. So let me pause there and see if there are other questions. You've got it all figured out, right? You're done. No questions? Okay. Whoops. Getting help, I think, is a really big piece of that. Piece of this. I recently read Sally Krawcheck's book, and in it she quotes Carla Harris, and I'm not quoting it exactly, but she says something to the effect of, the most important meetings happen when you're not in the room. And I think this is a critical issue, is a lot of effective self-promotion is having somebody of influence who's willing to back you when you're not there. Because that's what's happening, whether it's the partners meeting where they're voting on partnership and you are not in the room and somebody has to say, well, if she doesn't make partner, I haven't seen a litigator like this pass through our doors in 10 years. If she's not making partner at this firm, I don't know who is. How do you get somebody to do that? You need to, again, cultivate that indispensability to that person, but you need to seek out these sponsors or mentors who are willing to back you. And by the way, I briefly touched on the difference between sponsors and mentors. It's an important distinction. The research is really interesting on this. What has been found is that, in fact, women are quite good at developing mentoring relationships, but there's not necessarily a causal relationship between good mentoring and increased compensation or increased promotion. So this notion of sponsorship, meaning having people of influence being willing to back you, is critical. And the idea that these people can help in your self-promotion process is going to be a really important piece of this process. So engaging other people to do it for you is really important. The one caveat here I say is be careful with personal relationships, and that scenario that Pat posed earlier today was an example of that. In the swim meet with me, the vilified sister, who was not so happy that my sister was tapping into this personal relationship to access the Lyft in-house lawyer. It's a delicate line. I actually think we as women most often err on the side of caution too much. And I think the risk is that we are often more engaged in our communities, whether it's our kids' schools or religious organizations. We do a lot of nonprofit work. If we're foreclosing all of those personal networks, we're leaving a lot of opportunities on the table. So I really want to underscore that it's not as if you can't go near those personal connections. And in fact, I'll go as far as to say I think it's a big mistake to leave those personal relationships on the table. That said, I do think you need to tread a little bit more lightly there and be more thoughtful about, again, the earlier comment I made about knowing your audience. Stacy?
And I would just say from personal experience that my male personal relationships are way more comfortable coming to me and asking for work than my female personal relationships. So this is, to me, where I've seen the biggest distinction in my network as far as who's willing to come to me to ask for work with respect to maybe firms that don't currently do work for us, right? It's something where women just haven't been as comfortable to do it.
I think that's absolutely right, and I've actually seen that in my research. I do speak on this notion of the ask, and it taps into precisely this issue. And I think, again, it's not only that we as women are more reluctant to tap into that network, but it's disproportionately worse for us because, again, we often are more engaged in our communities than our spouses or partners or that kind of thing. Did I see another hand? Okay. Making the ask. This is something, Mindy, when you shared your confession in the beginning of the day, this is something that really resonated with me. I think we as women are really good at relationship building, and I think where we often fall short is at the ask. So a lot of good relationship building is the things that Pat was talking about earlier about really investing in those relationships. But there's also this issue of converting that relationship and being able to take that additional step and make that ask whatever that is. So again, I think asking is mostly about giving. How do you make the ask a give? So a classic example would be the employment law firm lawyer who has been trying to get access and exposure to an in-house legal department and will say to an in-house friend or contact, I know you probably need that, harassment training, and or I know you probably need CLEs or your colleagues need CLEs in this employment law area. I'm happy if it would be helpful to jump in and do a presentation to your legal department. Now, in fact, again, that is a give because, in fact, that department needs that likely, and they don't really want to pay for it. But is it a huge opportunity for that employment lawyer to get before that legal department? Absolutely. So again, just like I was suggesting before about pairing self-promotion with the benefit for your employer, you should always be thinking when you're going to make an ask, whatever that ask is, how can I make the ask a give? How can I be helpful in trying to be a resource to this person? Practicing and role-playing is really important. You saw that demonstrated example this morning about with I think it was Chris, where we were talking about that old law school classmate who you hadn't been in touch with. Well, if you could say, well, I was learning about that litigation matter, and we've handled this for XYZ clients, we could really be helpful here. That's a way to sort of turn the conversation so it's not as much an ask, and again, how to be a resource. But being able to make specific and small asks as a starting point and getting ourselves up, sort of the courage to build the tolerance for this asking is really important. Learning out how to ask, again, Pat again said this morning earlier today about, a lot of us who are rainmakers think about no as in not now. I really want to underscore this. To me, a lot of asking is about asking again. So it may be that you have a whole conversation and you're that law firm lawyer and you talk about, we'd love to be helpful in terms of employment work and sort of understanding if we could do that training, let's say. And then let's say the in-house lawyer is like, we're dealing with year-end stuff. We really, just don't have time to think about sort of ancillary, sort of extra expenses right now other than dealing with the immediate constraints of our matters that are before us right now. To be able to say, great, is there a time where you're reevaluating budget for 2018 where you may have more latitude for those kinds of trainings when I can follow up with you? And often you get a yes. If you could follow up with me after first quarter of 2018, that'd be great. So this notion of asking again and being able to just frame it again is, well, what would be helpful to you in terms of follow-up as opposed to, I just have so deflated that you just rejected me. What do I do now? It's a whole different way of framing the issue. Pausing for questions. Yes?
But also conversely, that they're less likely to judge their male friends. Women, it seems like if you ask another woman, hey, how about this professional favor when you're a friend, people feel like you're using them more often, crossing a social line. So how do you avoid, making somebody feel like you're trading on your friendship when they don't want you to?
Right, and this issue of trading on your friendship, and I'll tell you where I've seen it actually often be even more strained is if you're in a community where there are a lot of stay-at-home parents. I have a lot of friends some of whom work, some of whom don't work, and a lot of times their husbands are the people who are going to be better work resources to me, let's say. And so it's even one step even harder because it's not only like, oh, am I trading in on this personal thing, but I'm sort of going around this girlfriend to access her husband. It can be very tricky. I think the way to handle it the best is really to be that professional resource before you have the need. So let's say you're a law firm lawyer and you're dying to get in-house and your friend works in-house and could be a real entree either at her company or some other company. Rather than start sort of hitting her up as a professional contact at that moment when you're ready to transition jobs, being able to be thoughtful way before then and saying, starting to talk about, oh, what's your practice area? Oh, sending articles that way. Oh, you know what, my firm has like a business development budget. Let's go out to lunch and talk about these things, sort of trying to get that person to see you as a blurred line, not just in the personal context, but being a professional resource so that when you do make that transition and make some sort of ask, and maybe you start as a small ask, it's not as sort of jarring, and that person has now already, by the time you make that ask, they've been the beneficiary of your professional association as well. And by the way, a lot of times people think that, again, that it needs to be a quid pro quo. Absolutely not. But not only that, if you can be helpful to somebody in one context, they may be thinking of you in another one. So you may, it may be hard to get your kid into some preschool, and you know somebody on the board that helps that friend, and then in a year you may need some help on something professional. So it can be much more fluid, and so the idea of just collectively being a resource person and anticipating that one day you may need something from them, and just kind of practicing a premise of generosity can really help you. Yes.
This is more like a comment than a question per se, but lately, I'm at a fellowship, which will naturally come to an end at the government. And so, of course, I'm like looking out, how do I build my network, and how do I ask people for favors, or at least to talk? And I have a friend of mine who, she's a wonderful human to me and a big feminist. And sometimes she's like my hype man. And I've been texting her and just being like, oh, I'm really nervous to send this thing. And lately, what has been getting me to do this, and she just says, what would a similarly situated dude do? And I'm like, you're right, I'm sending that email. And that is shockingly helpful because as people are saying, men do feel more comfortable pushing an envelope in many different ways, and it really does actually give me the courage to hit send on emails that I'm like, oh, this is a little much or a little forward, and I'm like, nope, the guys would do it, I'm sending it, it's done.
Right, and I think I would even take it a step further and say, in addition to having a friend who can give you that push, which is wonderful, to give that email or that kind of in draft form to some men who can be helpful and be able to provide that feedback and say, oh yeah, this is totally standard. Of course you should be doing this. So to be able to actually vet it with some people who, and so not just sort of assuming that the way, the microcosm that you look at things or your girlfriends look at it is the way that everybody's doing business. In fact, if you broaden your network and who you can share those kinds of things, you may in turn get feedback and say, yeah, this is standard, you shouldn't worry about it. And so being able to enlist, again, the help of others who may give you that alternate perspective can be really valuable. Any other questions? Yes.
I had a question, but first I have a comment for you, which is some of my girlfriends and I have decided to live in the world of abundance, and we're all helping each other out, and we are going to each other's LinkedIn profiles and promoting each other, and finding those girlfriends who are in a similar profession. Instead of thinking of them as competition, we're saying we're all going to rise together. The more of us that succeed, the more of us will succeed, and so finding those sort of opportunities might be good too. But I had a question for you, which is, you talked about sponsorship earlier, and, oftentimes we look at our manager as sort of our path forward. But when you recognize that your manager is actually sponsoring somebody else, and how do you navigate going around your manager and finding somebody either similarly situated to your manager or above your manager, maybe outside of your own group, to begin a relationship with, and to have them start promoting you or sponsoring you for things without sort of crossing those political lines and it looking like you're trying to circumvent?
Right. It's a really important question. First of all, on sponsorship, I want to just mention one thing that's really important is ideally to have somebody who's a sponsor outside of your organization, because when you have somebody who is a sponsor within your organization, which is really important and helpful, that person may be focused on how your interests align with theirs. And so if it's really professionally, let's say, important for you you're not going to really get promoted or have significant increased pay, let's say, until you leave that company, that person who's your sponsor internally may not want to support that because it may not be consistent with their interests. So first off, not exactly responsive to your question, but first off, it's always good to have a sponsor outside of the organization. But to your question about sort of how to navigate if your immediate person who should be your ready sponsor is not necessarily doing that, I like to be really direct. My first suggestion would be to go to them. It's apparent to you that they're sponsoring somebody else outside of your group. I would have a conversation with them, ideally coffee or lunch or something like that, not behind the desk, that says, you know what, I really, at this point of my career, want to make sure, since you're my immediate supervisor, that I am supporting you and being the resource to you in every possible way that I can. I would really welcome your feedback on how I can ensure that I'm doing that. And in turn, there may be feedback there that's important for you to learn that you're not doing or you could be doing. So that's really valuable. In that same conversation, you can then say, I'm also really interested in growing in different ways, and I was thinking about accessing the expertise of these other people, X, Y, and Z, who are in these complementary groups, who may also be able to help me bring value in terms of my own professional development, but back into this group. So it's not asking for permission, but it's basically telling that person, number one, let me make sure I'm meeting all your needs, and number two, by the way, I have my own needs, and I want to see how I can otherwise meet them, but it is announcing that you're going to do that. So it's not surreptitious, and it's really giving that person the invitation at first to broaden what you may be able to do for them. Does that make sense? Great. So paying attention to the details, I think, is incredibly important. And this is not, you look around research around this with respect to women, and we are judged more harshly on how, our tone and things like this. But I want to be clear, this is gender neutral in the sense that I think that both men and women should be very attuned to how they make asks, how they try to self-promote, how they do this. So it came up in a prior presentation that there was sensitivity to this, so I really want to be clear. I think this pertains to anybody. But being aware of everything from your physical stance to making eye contact with people, to your tone, and the timing of things. I'll pause on timing. I think it's so important. A lot of times I'll see people who will arrange a lunch, and they'll sort of chit-chat for an hour and a half, and then the client is getting ready to leave. And then they're like, oh, by the way, I was hoping to get a meeting and blah, blah. And they're just like blurting out all these asks. And like the person's like, you're paying the check. The waiter's like, did you want more coffee? It's like really bad. So being really aware of the timing of an ask. And if you're having an hour and a half lunch with somebody and they're getting ready to pack up after that, you need to be thoughtful, midway through the lunch, or preferably first half of the lunch, saying, I'm really so great to catch up. There were a couple things that I had in my mind that I thought I would share with you. Another example of this, in terms of redirecting the conversation in a meeting or a lunch, you're in charge of the timing if you have an ask. It's really critical. But another example of this is people will often ask to get together, let's say, again, for lunch, and they'll have this lovely, conversation, and then, 2 days later, there's the thank you note from the lunch, and it's like, oh, by the way, I was hoping you could do X, Y, and Z for me. It's like, wait a minute, your window was there. You had those people, they were like, right, all eyes on you. It's over. Like, they don't want to do extra work, and a lot of these things are much better to happen, over conversation. There's a lot of subtlety. So being really thoughtful about that magic window that you may have somebody's attention is going to be really important in your own self-promotion and efforts. And along those lines, same thing around the venue. It's, you're on the side of a soccer field. I used to coach my 3 sons in soccer. Like, I actually got business from that. But, like, I wasn't transacting the deal there. It was like, this dad was like, I'm not getting along well with my employer. I'm like, call me, here's my card. Like, there's a place and time for things. So being thoughtful about the venue is really important. And I've talked already about the audience, but also framing your request in such a way that, again, you're maximizing the opportunity for a yes. I see a lot of people who are like, you probably don't have this need, but like, I was just thinking that on the off chance there would ever be a time where maybe blah, blah. I'm just like, this is exhausting. Like, can you just get out with it? So really about that framing. You think these are all details. I think they're central. There was a hand up right around here. Yes?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, as a client, I have been to those lunches, and you're 3/4 of the way through. Like you said, you're paying the check, and I have to say, from a client perspective, it's very confusing. You're sitting there going, like, what do we do? Are we trying to do business? So just on the other end of it, I actually welcome, timing. I know why I'm there. I'm not stupid, and that's fine. And if I've accepted this lunch, it's because we have something to talk about. And if you wait until you're paying the check to do it, then I agree, you're losing the opportunity. But from the client perspective, it's like, what's happening here?
Right,
So,
and you feel like your time is being wasted.
Exactly.
The other thing interesting is that women actually are very good at representing other people's interests, in a law firm or in any other context, let's say. But we often do fall short in the self-promotion area. And what's unfortunate is often people perceive, well, if she can't even say why she's good at anything, why should I feel confident thinking that she's going to represent our company in that sort of way? Even though that inference is not always accurate, that is a natural gravitation that people have to think, like, they can't deliver for themselves. How are they going to deliver for us? And so this issue about how to, again, demonstrate the value that you can bring and present yourself in such a way that it's convincing and compelling is critical to how people are going to be evaluating you. Owning it is a really important piece of this. And what I mean by that is taking credit where credit is due and being, saying thank you. So for example, sometimes somebody is being called up to speak at an event and somebody will be reading the bio, and maybe it's an abbreviated bio, and I see often women going up to the stage like, like, stop, it's, and it's like, this is a moment. You're being recognized, you're being introduced. It's okay. Like, you can own that, and actually, it's okay for people to know what the various awards are that you've received before they hear your remarks or whatever. That's a situation where protocol actually is that you're going to be recognized. And so for those of you who have that opportunity and are actually even squashing that, again, that's just a missed opportunity, and it's expected. Just as in your review, it's expected that your conduct will be and your performance will be discussed. Same with at that talk or some other venue. The other thing I see very effectively done with women, in particular, again, around self-promotion, is taking a factual approach. So what I mean by that is rather than say, I'm in a meeting, let's say pitching an in-house legal department lawyer on doing IP work, rather than be like, I really am credible on the IP area and I've won awards and all these sorts of things. Instead, it's saying, I see that you've had a number of these litigations in this certain patent area, polymers. I knew that from one client. Anyway, why don't, we've actually handled for other clients the following types of similar areas that relate to polymers. And we, have had successes in those areas, and we think we would be effective here. So it's being able to give the facts, let's say, of those other representations that were successful, rather than saying, hey, I'm great in this area, but to say, we've had demonstrated success in these areas. We'd love the opportunity to be able to take some of that expertise and bring together the team that has had success in the area also in that area. Questions? Yes?
I just wanted to mention a caution, and that is about confidentiality. So as you're self-promoting and talking about all the great matters you handled for another client, please only use publicly available information, because if that client finds out they are out sharing their secrets, it could be the death knell. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. So know when it's too much. This is definitely a delicate line, and ways that you can find out if you're going too far is certainly if you have the opportunity to solicit some anonymous feedback. As a public speaker, I've had that benefit, and it is quite humbling. I mean, there's certain types of feedback you say, okay, I'm never doing that again. I'm still blushing from some of that stuff. But being able to get anonymous feedback is critical. And then recognizing they're going to be outliers all the time. So some people are just not going to like you or going to just never give you the benefit of the doubt. But then also many of us will have a personal board of directors, sort of an inner circle of confidants who can give you some feedback about, is this really, are you doing this right? Is this the way to now to navigate this? And getting that feedback and understanding that it's a work in progress, you always should be soliciting that feedback is really important. Acknowledging when it is shameless self-promotion is also really important. There's a consultant who I really admired for years, Arnie Cantor, and he used to have a newsletter, and he actually had the head. He has a great sense of humor, and he had a heading of one of the areas of the newsletter that said shameless self-promotion. So, of course, I always went to that, and he was like, I'm speaking here, I'm doing this, I won this award. And, it was all true, but he was just owning it. He was just kind of saying, here I am, and it's okay to do that, too. Sometimes you go too far, and you're in a meeting, and you say something, and it's awful, to just say, ouch, oh, that, I'm sorry about that, that was too much. Having that sense of humor and that humility to say that and being able to just be honest about it, again, engenders goodwill with colleagues and clients, and enables you to sort of skirt by the issue rather than make it some monumental, mistake. Obviously, if there's something really kind of egregious that you did, you want to apologize. But generally, it's just about if you've been able to strike the right balance, and sometimes you're going to miss the mark. And again, showing that humility and the ability to make mistakes is a really important quality. Developing a signature, I think, is also really important. I think so much about effective self-promotion is actually about just making yourself memorable and being distinguishable in one way or the other. There are people who have signatures about certain things, and you see these pictures of my shoes. I'm really into shoes. These are not my best ones today. I usually like to walk around. I've been told today, because it's videoing, that I'm only allowed to stay in this little space, which is problematic because I usually like to show off my shoes. And I will walk the entire room. I can't do that. But no joke, I've actually been able to get clients through my shoes. People have recognized my shoes. So whatever it is, the idea is really, do you have some sort of signature that people are going to know you, remember you, whether it's humor, whether it's something that's fun. I think a lot of people are afraid to be personal about showing who they are, their personalities. And that's often what people remember. I remember when I started doing public speaking almost 20 years ago, I always told stories about my family. And I was working as a litigator initially, and nobody was talking about their kids. I mean, that was completely taboo. It was something that was natural to me. You want to do things that are natural to you, but you also want to do things that set you apart, that people can relate to on some level and feel that you're original and you're contributing something that's different. I want to pause again and see if there are any more questions. I know we're really getting close to the wine. So I want to end with one more story. And I want to share a story about when I was 4 years old. And my parents used to belong to this swim club. And they had a tradition where all the kids who couldn't swim, mostly 3- and 4-year-olds, would be involved in a peanut race where they distributed peanuts all over the stairs of the pool. And within a certain allotted amount of time, all the 3- and 4-year-old kids had to collect as many peanuts as possible. And the person at the end with the most peanuts won. So it starts the race. And I'm furiously collecting the peanuts, and time is passing. But I get to a point where I'm like very small, and there's only so many peanuts I can hold in my 4-year-old hands. So I was thinking, I was wearing this bathing suit that was sort of the precursor to Spanx. It was like Danskin, if those of you who remember that. Anyway, so I started stuffing the peanuts down my bathing suit. So time was called, and I had a lot of peanuts. So we were directed to our towels, and all the kids put their peanuts on their towels, and I proceeded to unfurl my bathing suit, and all my peanuts fell. So I won the peanut race. I share this story because to me it's really underscoring my remarks today. I think with self-promotion is something really uncomfortable that we really all wrestle with. We know we need to do this. We know we need to convey our value, but we're not quite sure how to do it and strike that right tone so that we can advance the way we want to, but not step on toes and fingers and not offend people. And the story about me with the peanut race is really important because I wasn't breaking any rules, but I also wasn't asking for permission, and I also wasn't afraid to stand out and to really, in that case, go for what I wanted. And that's really what I want to leave you with as a parting message is go for it. Often we're the ones who are holding ourselves back, and we shouldn't do that anymore. There's a world of opportunity out there, and it's really up to us to seize it. So thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.